Something is happening to you right now that you cannot feel. Not a disease, not a slow decline you can track on a chart. Something quieter. Something that has been occurring every single night, in the dark, in the 6 inches of space between your skull and the device you trust with your memories, your mornings, and your most private thoughts. You are being rewritten, and you haven't noticed because the pen never makes a sound. Think about last night. You told yourself 5 minutes, just 5 minutes before you closed your eyes, and somewhere between the blue glow and the silence of your room, an hour disappeared. Maybe 2. You know this feeling. You've accepted it as normal. But here is what nobody has told you about those hours. Your brain does not switch off when your eyes get heavy. It does not pause. It does not wait. And what you've introduced into that bedroom isn't just light and distraction. It is a biochemical event. A neurological disruption your body spends the entire night trying to recover from. Most nights, it doesn't fully succeed. Here's the question that should disturb you. What is happening to your brain during those hours? And why, after years of this, do you wake up feeling like a slightly diminished version of yourself that you've quietly accepted as just who you are now? Stay with that, because the answer is going to change how you see every night that comes after this one. Most people believe sleep is passive, a pause, the body powering down like a laptop left idle. This assumption is exactly what makes the damage possible, because the truth is the opposite of everything you think you know about what happens when you close your eyes. Your brain at night is not resting. It is working harder than it does during most of your waking hours. Sorting, pruning, consolidating, washing, rebuilding. Sleep is not the absence of brain activity. It is the most critical brain activity of your entire day, and you have been contaminating it every single night with a device engineered by some of the most sophisticated behavioral scientists alive, whose singular professional purpose is to keep your nervous system just activated enough to stay engaged. Just one more video, just one more check, just one more scroll to the bottom of something that has no bottom. That phrase is not a character flaw. It is a neurological trap. The variable reward mechanism, unpredictable content, unpredictable validation, unpredictable stimulation, is the same psychological architecture used in slot machines. You are pulling that lever in bed, in the dark, in the hours your brain has specifically reserved for its own survival. But the trap doesn't end when you put the phone down. That's the part nobody talks about. The moment your screen lights up in a dark room, your eyes send an immediate signal to a tiny region deep in your brain called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, your body's master clock. Calibrated over hundreds of thousands of years of human evolution to read one signal. Light means day, darkness means night. Ancient, precise, and completely defenseless against a device that produces the specific wavelength of light most perfectly engineered to confuse it. Blue light, the kind your phone emits in concentrated doses, the kind that tells your suprachiasmatic nucleus with absolute biological certainty that it is noon, not evening, not winding down, noon. And in response, your brain does exactly what it was built to do. It halts melatonin production, not reduces it, halts it. The hormone responsible for initiating and maintaining deep sleep is chemically suppressed by the device you are holding while you are trying to fall asleep. But melatonin is only the first casualty. While melatonin crashes, cortisol, your primary stress and alertness hormone, begins to rise prematurely. Cortisol is supposed to peak in early morning, pulling you from sleep into wakefulness. When your phone pushes it forward by hours, your body enters a state of low-grade biological stress while you are lying completely still in a dark room. Your nervous system is preparing for a threat that doesn't exist. Your heart rate subtly elevates, your muscles hold quiet tension, and your brain, instead of descending into the slow-wave deep sleep it desperately needs, hovers in a shallow, restless state, close enough to sleep to fool you, but too activated to heal you. Then there is the dopamine problem, and this is where it gets structural. Dopamine is not simply the pleasure chemical popular science has reduced it to. It is more precisely the anticipation chemical. It fires not when you receive a reward, but when your brain predicts one is coming. A brain that spent the last hour inside an algorithmically engineered unpredictability machine is a brain that cannot switch off expectation. It keeps searching, even in sleep, even in dreams. The dopamine loop doesn't end because your eyes close. It runs in the background like software you forgot to quit. And while that loop runs, your brain's most critical maintenance process is being sabotaged. During deep sleep, specifically slow wave sleep, your brain performs something called synaptic pruning. It literally dismantles unnecessary neural connections and reinforces the ones that matter. This is how learning becomes memory, how emotional experience gets processed and filed rather than left raw and unresolved. It requires specific, uninterrupted stages of sleep to occur. When your architecture is fractured by cortisol spikes, suppressed melatonin, and running dopamine loops, pruning becomes incomplete. Memories don't consolidate correctly. Emotional regulation weakens, and the glymphatic system, your brain's internal waste clearing mechanism, which activates almost exclusively during deep sleep, fails to fully flush the metabolic byproducts that accumulated in your neural tissue throughout the day. You wake up carrying yesterday's unprocessed waste, yesterday's unresolved emotion, a dopamine system already reaching for its next hit before your feet have touched the floor. Every night, compounding, quietly. Now here is the part you don't connect to the phone. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with a diagnosis or a dramatic collapse. It arrives as a Tuesday morning where you feel inexplicably behind before the day has started. It arrives as a conversation you cannot stay present in because some part of your mind is already somewhere else, refreshing something, waiting for something it cannot name. It arrives as you, a slightly eroded version that you've slowly accepted as normal. Consider your attention span, not abstractly, but specifically. When did you last read more than 3 paragraphs without your hand moving toward the phone? When did you last sit through a meal, a conversation, a moment of genuine stillness without the pull? The capacity to sustain focus is not a personality trait. It is a neurological function, and it is being systematically dismantled by a sleep-deprived, dopamine-flooded brain trained night after night to expect constant stimulation and to interpret the absence of it as threat. This is not laziness. This is structural damage. And then there is the emotional dimension, which is perhaps the most painful and the least discussed. When the prefrontal cortex, responsible for emotional regulation, impulse control, rational decision-making, is chronically deprived of restorative sleep, it loses thickness. Literally. Neuroscientists have documented measurable reductions in prefrontal cortical volume in individuals with chronic sleep disruption. What that means in lived experience is a life where emotions arrive faster, hit harder, and are harder to metabolize. Irritability that feels disproportionate, anxiety with no clear origin, a pervasive sense of overwhelm in situations that should feel manageable. You scroll to escape the anxiety. The scrolling disrupts your sleep. The disrupted sleep generates more anxiety, and the phone waits on the nightstand, glowing softly, offering the exact relief that caused the wound. There is something else happening that almost nobody names. The hours between midnight and dawn are not just biologically significant, they are psychologically significant. Throughout human history, these were the hours when the mind was left alone with itself. When integration happened, when the self had space to consolidate not just memory but meaning, when you were, in the deepest sense, nobody's audience. That space is gone now for an entire generation, replaced by content, comparison, and the ambient presence of several billion other lives available for consumption at the exact moment the self needs silence to know itself. The cost is not just poor sleep, it is a quiet, persistent confusion about who you actually are when no one is watching, including the algorithm. Here is where most content would tell you to charge your phone in another room, and you would nod. And tomorrow night the phone would be back on the pillow, not because you lack discipline, because behavioral change built on willpower alone has a near zero long-term success rate when it competes against a nervous system conditioned over thousands of consecutive nights. Telling a dopamine-altered, sleep-deprived brain to simply choose differently is like telling someone to swim upstream in a current they cannot see. This is not about willpower. This is about architecture. Your brain is not broken. It is adaptive. The same neuroplasticity that allowed the phone to rewire your sleep is the exact same neuroplasticity that will allow you to reclaim it, but only if you stop fighting the symptom and start restructuring the conditions that created it. Neuroscientists call this stimulus control, the deliberate redesign of your environment to interrupt automatic behavior before it begins. Your bedroom has been neurologically coded as a place of dopamine anticipation. That association lives below conscious thought. It activates before you've made a decision, which is why the choice to not reach for your phone happens a second too late after the hand has already moved. You have to change what the room means before you change what you do inside it. The phone does not enter the bedroom, not face down, not on silent, not across the room. Out. This is not punishment. This is neurological reassociation. Every night that room exists without the device, your nervous system begins, slowly, incrementally, to recode that space as safety and descent rather than anticipation and search. The first few nights will feel like withdrawal, because they are. Your dopamine system will register the absence of its expected input as deficit. You will feel restless, understimulated, almost anxious in the quiet. This is the system recalibrating. Move through it. The second layer is what you replace the phone with, and this matters more than most people realize. A behavioral vacuum is always filled. If you remove the scroll without replacing the neurological function it was serving, the craving returns with compounded force. Ask yourself honestly what the phone was giving you in those final hours. Escape from unprocessed thought? Stimulation to avoid the discomfort of stillness? Whatever the function, find its neurological equivalent. Slow reading re-engages the prefrontal cortex without triggering dopamine spikes. Deliberate breathwork activates the parasympathetic nervous system, lowering cortisol and physically preparing the brain for deep sleep. Journaling, specifically the kind that externalizes unresolved thought rather than rehearses it, reduces the cognitive load your brain would otherwise carry into sleep and attempt to process in fragmented, exhausting cycles. The third layer is the most powerful: identity reconstruction. Behavioral neuroscience is increasingly clear that sustainable change does not come from motivation or information. It comes from identity shift. The person who reclaims their sleep is not the person who tries harder to resist the phone. It is the person who has internalized a different self-concept entirely, not someone trying to use their phone less. Someone who is the kind of person who protects their mind. Someone for whom deep, uninterrupted sleep is not a health goal, but a non-negotiable expression of who they are. This reframe is not semantic, it is neurological. Identity-based behavior activates different circuits than goal-based behavior, regions associated with core self-concept rather than executive planning, more automatic, more resilient, far less vulnerable to a weak moment at midnight. You are not trying to break a habit, you are deciding who you are. And give your brain time. The glymphatic system begins recovering measurable function within 3 to 5 nights of restored, deep sleep. Melatonin rhythms begin restabilizing within 1 to 2 weeks of consistent light discipline. Dopamine receptor sensitivity, dulled by chronic overstimulation, begins recalibrating within 3 to 4 weeks of reduced compulsive use. These are not motivational estimates. These are documented biological timelines. The brain wants to heal. It simply needs the conditions that make healing possible, which brings us back to where we started. Something is happening in that bedroom after midnight. Something quiet enough that you've never noticed it, but consistent enough that it has been changing you. Not your habits, not your mood, you, the architecture of how you think, how you feel, how you remember, and who you are when you wake up. There is a version of you that exists only in the dark, not performing for an audience, not curated for a feed. The version that lives in the hours when the world goes quiet and the self is left alone with its own weight. That version has always been there. But for the first time in human history, an entire generation has been handed the tools to ensure they never have to meet it. The silence was never empty. It was for integration, for the slow consolidation of who you are beneath everything you do, for the dreams that process grief you haven't named yet, for the version of your mind that does not need to be entertained to feel worthy of existing. Your phone is not your enemy. It is a mirror. And what it has reflected back, night after night in that blue glow, is a civilization so afraid of its own interior life that it will accept neurological damage as a fair trade for never having to sit alone in the quiet and simply be. The brain being rewritten in that bedroom is not an abstract organ in a medical textbook. It is the physical substrate of your consciousness. Every thought you will think tomorrow, every emotion you will feel, every decision you will make about your life and who deserves to be in it and what you are willing to become. That brain is being shaped right now, tonight, in the silence between one scroll and the next. You started this knowing something was happening in the dark. Now you know what it is. The only question that remains is whether you will be the one holding the pen.